Lao-tzu or Lao-tzu was a Chinese philosopher, believed to have lived in the 6th century BC. He is considered the author of the Taoist classic, the Tao-te Ching, which offers an iconoclastic spiritual philosophy, based on an underlying unity of the universe. The work of Lao-tzu has a timeless appeal and has been claimed by the religion of Taoism but also co-opted into a range of spiritual philosophies and anti-authoritarian movements and remains relevant today. Lao-tzu, Chinese, Master Lao, or Old Master. Original name, Wade Giles. Li-er, deified as Lao Jun, Tai Shang Lao Jun, or Tai Shang Xuanyuan Wangdi, also called Lao Dun or Lao Dan, flourished 6th century BCE, China, the first philosopher of Chinese Taoism and the alleged author of the Tao-te Ching, a primary Taoist writing. Modern scholars discount the possibility that the Tao-te Ching was written by only one person but readily acknowledge the influence of Taoism on the development of Buddhism. Lao-tzu is venerated as a philosopher by Confucians and as a saint or god in popular religion and was worshipped as an imperial ancestor during the Tang dynasty, 618 to 907. The life of Lao-tzu. Despite his historical importance, Lao-tzu remains an obscure figure. The principal source of information about his life is a biography in the Shiji, Records of the Historian, by Sima Qian. This historian, who wrote in about 100 BCE, had little solid information concerning the philosopher. He says that Lao-tzu was a native of Koren, a village in the district of Hu in the state of Chu, which corresponds to the modern Lui in the eastern part of Henan province. His family name was Li, his proper name his appellation Dan. He was appointed to the office of Shi at the royal court of the Zhou dynasty, circa 1046 to 256 BCE. Shi today means historian, but in ancient China the Shi were scholars specializing in matters such as astrology and divination and were in charge of sacred books. After noting the civil status of Lao-tzu, the historian proceeds to relate a celebrated but questionable meeting of the old Taoist with the younger Confucius, 551–479 BCE. The story has been much discussed by the scholars. It is mentioned elsewhere, but the sources are so inconsistent and contradictory that the meeting seems a mere legend. During the supposed interview, Lao-tzu blamed Confucius for his pride and ambition, and Confucius was so impressed with Lao-tzu that he compared him to a dragon that rises to the sky, riding on the winds and clouds. No less legendary is a voyage of Lao-tzu to the west. Realizing that the Zhou dynasty was on the decline, the philosopher departed and came to the Shanghu Pass, which was the entrance to the state of Qin. Yingxi, the legendary guardian of the pass, Guanling, begged him to write a book for him. Thereupon, Lao-tzu wrote a book in 2 sections of 5,000 characters, in which he set down his ideas about the Tao, literally, way, and the De, its virtue, the Tao-te Ching. Then he left, and nobody knows what has become of him, says Sima Qian. After the account of the journey of Lao-tzu and of the redaction of the book, Sima Qian alludes to other persons with whom Lao-tzu was sometimes identified. One was Lao Lazi, a Taoist contemporary of Confucius. Another was a great astrologer named Dan. Sima Qian adds, maybe Lao-tzu has lived 150 years, some say more than 200 years. Since the ancient Chinese believed that superior men could live very long, it is natural that the Taoists credited their master with an uncommon longevity. But this is perhaps a rather late tradition because Zhuangzi, the Taoist sage of the 4th century BCE, still speaks of the death of Lao-tzu without emphasizing an unusual longevity. To explain why the life of Lao-tzu is so shrouded in obscurity, Sima Qian says that he was a gentleman recluse whose doctrine consisted in non-action, the cultivation of a state of inner calm, and purity of mind. Indeed, throughout the whole history of China, there have always been recluses who shunned worldly life. The author, or authors, of the Tao-te Ching was probably a person of this kind who left no trace of his life. The question of whether there was a historical Lao-tzu has been raised by many scholars, but it is rather an idle one. The Tao-te Ching, as we have it, cannot be the work of a single author. Some of its sayings may date from the time of Confucius. Others are certainly later, and a version of the text has been recovered in an archaeological find at Godian that dates to before 300 BCE. Owing to these facts, some scholars have assigned the authorship of the Tao-te Ching to the astrologer Dan, while others, giving credit to a genealogy of the descendants of the philosopher, which is related in the biography by Sima Qian, try to place the life of Lao Dan at the end of the 4th century BCE. But this genealogy can hardly be considered as historical. It proves only that at the time of Sima Qian a certain Li family, see above, pretended to be descended from the Taoist sage. It does not give a basis for ascertaining the existence of the latter. The name Lao-tzu seems to represent a certain type of sage rather than an individual. Hagiographical legends. Beyond the biography in the Shiji and sporadic mentions in other old books, several hagiographies were written from the 2nd century CE onward. These are interesting for the history of the formation of religious Taoism. During the Eastern, or later, Han Dynasty, 25–220 CE, Lao-tzu had already become a mythical figure who was worshipped by the people and occasionally by an emperor. Later, in religious circles, he became the Lord Lao, Lao Jun, revealer of sacred texts and savior of mankind. There were several stories about his birth, one of which was influenced by the legend of the miraculous birth of Buddha. Lao-tzu's mother is said to have borne him 72 years in her womb and he to have entered the world through her left flank. One legend gives an explanation of his family name, Li. The baby came to light at the foot of a plum tree, Li, and decided that Li, plum, should be his surname. Two legends were particularly important in the creed of the Taoists. According to the first, the Lao Jun was believed to have adopted different personalities throughout history and to have come down to the earth several times to instruct the rulers in the Taoist doctrine. The second legend developed from the story of Lao-tzu's journey to the West. In this account, the Buddha was thought to be none other than Lao-tzu himself. During the 3rd century CE, an apocryphal book was fabricated on this theme with a view to combating Buddhist propaganda. This book, the Lao-tzu Hawajing, Lao-tzu's conversion of the barbarians, in which Buddhism was presented as an inferior kind of Taoism, was often condemned by the Chinese imperial authorities. Lao-tzu has never ceased to be generally respected in all circles in China. To the Confucians he was a venerated philosopher. To the people he was a saint or a god. And to the Taoists he was an emanation of the Tao and one of their greatest divinities. Quotes. Beginnings and endings. A journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. Leaders and rulers. A leader is best when people barely know that he exists. Not so good when people obey and acclaim him, worst when they despise him. Self-control. He who conquers others is strong, he who conquers himself is mighty. Self-knowledge and self-deception. He who knows others is learned, he who knows himself is wise. Simplicity. Manifest plainness, embrace simplicity, reduce selfishness, have few desires. Thanks for watching this video. Please like, share, and subscribe.